All right, guys, you've gotten in the economics essay, and that's magnificent. I will be going through the essay over the weekend. I will try to get those back to you next week, and I'll try to make personalized videos for folks, but it's going to be tough. I'll do the best I can. I'll get those recorded and posted as fast as I can, and so you can get some feedback on them and kind of know where they are. And I and I hope everybody got through it. I will be downloading it and going through it over the next few days. It might take a little bit longer than I'd hope, because I have so much going on with the other classes. So and so I will do my absolute best to get these back to you, and I want to thank everybody for being patient with it and for getting it all done. That was magnificent. I will be going through all of the grades and everything and trying to turn this around as fast as I can so that you have feedback and know where you are. And I need to be clear, the real hard work for the class is done. You've done it. The last essay is over. I want to do a little bit of a final exam, and I want to be clear about something. This final exam, it isn't going to be tough to do. You can, in fact, do it on your own with as much time as you want to and send it in whenever you want to. In fact, you can discuss it with other people. And I'll tell you this, there's going to be more than one answer that's possible. This is really what it is. And so I'm going to give you a reading. That's this logical fallacies reading. And really this fallacies review, that's going to act as the final. That's it. Okay, so you can fill that page out, and I'll go through it in a bit. You can fill that out, send it in to me, and I'll tell you, everybody should ace this. And I need to be clear, everybody should. You go through the reading, and go through the final, or the review. It really is the final exam. It will count on it. You can work with other people. That's perfectly fine with me. So it's not possible to really cheat on this. I just want to give everybody an overview of logical fallacies and what they are. Okay, so understand that the last real assignment really was the econ essay, and you've done it. You're done. And so now we're just going to spend the last week going over the reading, and I'm going to post a few videos on this. And I do want everybody to kind of understand what the logical fallacies are, how they work, and have some ideas. So do the reading, the fallacies reading, and then do the review. So download this and go over it. Let me go through it for a little bit, what they are and what they aren't, because there's a lot of misunderstandings. So let me pop over here to the PowerPoint, because everything revolves around PowerPoint kind of. So it's a review of sloppy reasoning. And one of the things I want to be clear about from the beginning is logical fallacies are misnamed, because if you know something about logic, you'll know that these aren't logic. These are a reasoning issue. And because logic is really mathematical. It's putting verbal arguments or written arguments into a mathematical formula so that they can be checked for validity. Okay, so the logical fallacies, and I'm going to walk through all of them. There's a big old shopping list of them. They are poor reasoning. It's reasoning that's unreliable. But I need to be clear, it's something that we use all the time. So it's not a matter in logic. What they do is they come up with whether or not a certain type of reasoning is valid or invalid. Okay, 2 plus 2 is not 5. Okay, that's in logic that would be called invalid. Okay, it doesn't hold up. Okay, so one way to understand this is that you could have something that's true but invalid, or you could have something that's logically valid but untrue. And I use an example, which is in the end a type of logical fallacy, to demonstrate this. So I could say that I have 2 cats at my house. Let's say I don't, but I only have one. But let's say I have 2 cats, and if 2 cats ran into my back door, and I took them into my house, how many cats do I have now? Well, logically, 2 cats that I already had plus 2 new cats would equal 4. But you know what? One of the cats I just took in was pregnant and had a kitten, and so now I actually have 5. So the answer that I have 5 cats right now is invalid, because the logic, the addition of 2 plus 2, doesn't work out. It isn't 5. That's invalid. But empirically speaking, I do have 5. So notice that 2 plus 2 is 5. I had 2 cats. I brought 2 cats in. Now I have 5 cats. That is, in logic, invalid. But it's actually true. Okay? Because one of the cats was pregnant. But the logic isn't picking up on that. Okay? So logical reasoning is deductive reasoning. Okay? Inductive reasoning relies on observation. Deductive reasoning relies on proofs. So what I want to point out is that logical fallacies really are not logic. They aren't, because it works entirely off of deductive reasoning. And deductive reasoning is incredibly valid, incredibly valuable. It's essentially the type of reasoning behind mathematics. And if you look at the different fields of, how the different fields work, mathematics is obviously highly deductive. You don't go out and find, empirically 2 2s and put them together and find out that they're 4. No, you use the deductive reasoning method to find out 2 plus 2 is 4. But certain fields of science are highly mathematical, such as physics. It is highly reliant upon mathematics. And so there is not as much inductive research as there's deductive research. And so you'd better know your math if you go into physics. But it's not entirely. They use plenty of empirical observation. They use induction. So observation, they put their conclusions together from it. But it is a field that is highly reliant. For example, string theory there's not a really good way to prove the theories, with experiments. You have to rely on the mathematics. So, and anybody who really knows their physics, which I don't, would know that what I'm saying about it is actually, yeah, that's the way it is. So other fields, such as biology and stuff like that, they use plenty of mathematics. But it is an highly inductive field. In other words, they rely on observation. Okay, so they rely on observation. So I want you to know that it's very important to understand the nature of the reasoning and the nature of the field kind of work together. So to figure out what how things work. So there's often within every field certain types of deductions, but also certain types of inductions with how it works. So, and again, all fields, including art and art history, there are certain things that we work off of, when you understand aesthetics, with how the sublime works or how the beauty works, it's inductive. It's deductive. But to find out whether or not Shakespeare's plays or whether or not Stravinsky's music is sublime or beautiful, you would have to do some inductive work when you start applying it. All fields use induction and deduction to figure out how they work. So it goes back and forth. It's not a matter of one or the other. You're not picking baseball teams, and I hope you pick the Giants, not the Dodgers, but we'll talk about that later. Okay. So as we go through logical fallacies, please understand they are, in the end, reasoning skills. They are unreliable forms of reasoning. They could be true. You could use an unreliable form of reasoning, such as I just did, arguing from an example, and come up with a true conclusion. It could be entirely true. So, but I could have 4 cats. But but what you need to do is be aware that these certain forms of reasoning are unreliable. Okay. Let me go through these really kind of rapidly, and then I'll go through the reading even more rapidly. The kind I'm going to deal with for this unit and for this, and I'm going to have this sheet, this one's going to act as the test, and I'll go over these with another video because the videos are so exciting. These are the ones that are often cited. Okay, this is not an exhaustive list, And I need to be clear is that these things often overlap enormously, and they get up in a big ball of yarn and make a mess. So I want to be clear that these don't separate always entirely easily. So slippery slope, what it looks like is if you do that, well then, if you don't do your homework, then you're going to end up living in a van down by the river. That means you started, then it went bam, everything goes to hell fast. So watch out for that type of reasoning, okay? That's the kind of, living in a van down by the river reasoning. That just because you didn't do your math homework doesn't mean, no, you're not going to live in a van down by the river. So hopefully you're not watching this video from a van down by the river, or I don't want to talk about it. And I'm not making this from a van. I swear I'm actually in my office. Hasty generalization, it looks a lot the same. It's when you have a situation, and it's an isolated situation, and you universalize it rapidly, okay? So whether or not this situation, what you learn from one situation, can be applied to other situations has to be examined more carefully, okay? And it's a reasoning skill, and looking at the reasoning. So if you look at one situation where it worked out this way, does that mean these other situations are similar? Okay, so hasty generalization is to say all these situations are the same. Slow down and go through it a little more carefully, and that's more that's more reliable reasoning. Okay, correlation equals cause and effect fallacy. This is one of the most disturbing ones especially for people working in science, because it makes perfect sense to people who don't have scientific training. It's why a lot of people do, and I'm sorry, but I'll be blunt on this. People often think the flu shot causes the flu, because I got the flu shot on Wednesday and by Friday I was coming down with symptoms. No, the flu shot doesn't cause the flu. It can, in rare circumstances, trigger allergic reactions, but that's fairly rare. What happens and why people think that is the correlation is cause and effect fallacy, or it's unreliable reasoning. What almost certainly happened is that before you went in for the shot, you were exposed to your cousin who had the flu, because he opened the front door and you put your hand on the front door and you picked up the flu on it and you rubbed your eyes, and you had the flu virus in your system. The next day you went and got the shot, you didn't know you had the flu virus in your system. You did not start showing symptoms for 3 days, and that was a day or two after you got the shot. So what you want to be careful of is don't assume just because two things go together that there has to be cause and effect. This is frequently done in politics. If a politician was in office, blame him or her for what went on during his or her term. That's Susie Bob was the governor, and that's when the state ran into these troubles. That doesn't mean she caused them. Okay, she may have, but don't just on the basis of the correlation come up with a cause and effect. You do need to have correlation in order to have cause and effect. You do need to have it, but just because you have it doesn't mean it's cause and effect. Okay. So that's a fallacy. It often comes up in science. It's popular people often come up with assumptions about, this when they're dealing with things like illness and medical issues. But we often think of this with bad weather and whether or not, your dog got sick or something like that. Genetic or ad hominem attacks. These are like the Yo Mama attacks. Basically, if something you don't like, if somebody you don't like says something, dismiss it based on the fact that he or she said it. Okay, attacking the person, not the argument or what they said. Okay, so criticize the person, not the situation. Okay, and this is again done mostly in politics, but we can do it in science too. If Susie Bob came up with some conclusions in a study, you could say, and you have to be careful with this because you can do it both ways, you could, you hate Susie Bob because you knew her back in high school and she was so mean back then. So her research on, such and such, on mitochondria and all that other stuff must not be good. That's an ad hominem attack. Okay. So this is frequently an easy thing to do, especially in politics. When you don't like somebody of another party or something like that, or you don't like the person, you make an ad hominem attack to dismiss their points. Their points might or might not be, worthwhile. But the attack on the person's character or on the person, as such, is not the way to dismiss it. Okay, look at the content of what they've said rather than, them. Okay, the genetic fallacy is to argue that because of the origin of the idea, that's why it's corrupt. Okay, the idea might be perfectly fine. It has a lot in common with ad hominem. Ad hominem just goes to a person. It means to the man. Hominem is the man. Ad means to. But genetic fallacy is similar to it. If you argue that this is always rotten because, I hate Honda's cars because that car must be a pile of garbage because it's a Honda. And my dad drove a Honda and it used to always break down. By the way, I kind of like Hondas. But anyway, so that's a genetic fallacy. Assuming that the car is no good because it's, a brand, you don't necessarily know. It might be a really good, Yugo that's, a great race car, but probably not. So no matter. So based on the origin of the argument or of the source of the material that you assume it's got to be rotten, that's not good. And by the way, the genetic fallacy is often behind racist arguments. So be aware of that. Okay. And so I'm kind of making light of some of these, but some really vicious things are some vicious types of thinking rely heavily on on the genetic fallacy, but on logical fallacies that I'm going through here. Some of the most vicious types of thinking and attacks done on, obviously racist thinking is absolutely corrupt, but it relies heavily on the fallacies, on these logical fallacies. And so you can dismantle these kind of thinkings using this, okay? Either or fallacy. It's either my way or the highway, as they put it. It's painting the situation in black and white terms. It's this or we're all going to hell in a handbasket. It's either paradise or that. It's either, you're going to get well or we're all going to die. It's putting it in either or when usually, not always, but quite often there's probably a position somewhere in the middle that's more reliable. And I really want to emphasize the reliable term throughout these. It's not a matter of truth or not truth. That sounds much more like logical language. Logical fallacies, again, are about reasoning. And it's not about thumbs up, thumbs down. It's usually about reliability. So the either or fallacy is this or that. It's A or B. Usually there's something in between. Okay, it's A.3, but anyway. The red herring fallacy is bringing up an argument that looks like it's connected, but it isn't. We're going to go in a different direction. Okay, that's not good. Watch out for these because these are hard to detect when somebody does it because they don't want to talk about this, this, and this. They will throw out a red herring, which is a distraction argument that usually plays on people's emotions. Oftentimes in politics it does, plays on people's emotions and guides you to look at the bunny. Or don't look at the bunny. That's what it's doing. So the argument seems like it's related to what we're actually dealing with, but it's actually tangential. That's what red herrings do. Straw man is often looks a lot like it. Okay. Straw man is basically setting up the people you disagree with as if they're not very bright. Okay, kind of like the straw man in Wizard of Oz. It oversimplifies, and it's based on a caricature of your opposition rather than a real engagement. Okay, if I disagree with somebody, I'm going to portray them as being really goofy and then dismiss the goofy argument, which is a mischaracterization, and dismiss it. But it's based on a straw man. Maybe the other argument actually has a lot of importance to it, and some, God forbid, some truth to it. And maybe the truth is, again, it's about reliability. Maybe it's a little more reliable to go somewhere in between. Okay, moral equivalence is, you see these when, well, it's just like this. Well, it's just, you can hear this in the stupid form online when somebody says it's the Nazis, and they clearly don't know much about history. So moral equivalence is when you say this argument you don't agree with is the same as this, and it probably isn't. Usually those are like, red herrings. They try to trigger some kind of emotional attachment to scare you away from this argument, because it's really just like this. So the argument that triggers the emotions is the equivalent one that you're claiming is equivalent, but it isn't. That is designed to trigger an emotional reaction. The Nazi argument does that, because nobody likes to verbally say they like the Nazis, but that is designed to trigger a negative reaction to what I've attached it to. Okay, so watch out for that. So watch out for moral equivalent arguments. Begging the question is when there's an obvious question behind what somebody says, but they don't want to talk about it. They just avoid it. They're dancing around something. Okay, so it's, don't ask me about the spoon on my nose. It's obvious, but so that's what begging the question means. So it's, you're asking me to ask you, but you don't want me to. So that's what begging the question is often. So watch out for people who have a question that's obvious, screaming to be answered, but they don't want, they're dancing around it. Okay, this is the emperor has no clothes, so type of argument. Arguing from analogy. This one is extremely common. It's using an example as evidence. And I know a lot of people go, hey, what's wrong with using examples? Nothing's wrong with an example, but understand the purpose. Okay, examples are what advertising work off of. But most people know that advertisements aren't proof. Nor are examples. Examples are supposed to demonstrate ideas. Demonstrate. That's what advertising does. It doesn't prove ideas or show reliability. Okay, notice I watch out with my language. It's not about true or untrue or valid or invalid. It's about, is this reliable? Okay, if I want to tell you that, BMWs are the greatest car, look at that commercial. That shows you that they are the best. Oh man, and that commercial, they had the fastest lap time at Nürburgring. That is one heck of a nah. Okay, there's a lot more to it. Okay, so that evidence doesn't prove it. So that commercial doesn't, because that's not all there is to it when you start talking about something as complex as car performance. But in so many things, an example is what is provided as evidence. Now, one of the things I want to go through is, to be clear about, is these are effective. They work. This is why you will hear almost all politicians use them most of the time, because they work. One of the books I read was a Daniel Kahneman book on thinking fast, thinking slow, and what he went through is how these things seem to be wired into our brain. They are. So we actually do go about our day having used plenty of examples as evidence, and we don't like things that people we don't like say. If your mom tells you to eat your vegetables and you're really angry at your mom, well, damn it, that asparagus is awful. No, we do that kind of stuff all the time. We do it. So understand with logical fallacies, don't think of them as what other people might do and you're going to catch them doing it. Nah. Start being aware that you use them throughout your day. Think through. And I'm not telling you not to use them because, again, we use them. We use them all the time. That's how we think. But it tends to be a highly unreliable way of thinking. When you're working within a professional field, what they usually have, say within, biology or with even in English and in philosophy and physics. They have reliable ways of thinking. And those reliable ways don't rely on these logical fallacies. They don't do that. So these fallacies, though, are not logic. These are reasoning skills, and these are really wired into your brain. So be aware that you do this, and a lot of what you think is important and reliable, it's based on this. It doesn't mean it's untrue. It just watch out for the reasoning form. You're taking a little risk with the reasoning, but it might be true still, even if it's based on a silly form of reasoning, because it can be. But be aware of the silliness that led up to that conclusion, and as you go through it. So what you're going to see with this reading, this reading is really good, and this one is off copyright, so I'm not stealing. It's a good reading. It's a good thing to go through. This is English 104. This is getting you ready to move on with your major, okay? And it really goes through the hasty generalization, slippery slope, and all those kind of things. I think this will be very helpful no matter what your major is, and it's an easy reading. It's not that many pages, okay? I think it's about 4 pages. It's something you can read while having a hot cocoa or something like that. And then what I'd like you to work on, the assignment I'd like you to hand in, is this one over here. Let's see if I can find it. This is the logical fallacies quiz, if I can put it the right size. Where is it? Here it is. This is what's called the review, but I'm going to call it a quiz, and I'll count it as the final. And please understand, you can just go through it. Swimming pool leads to healthy lifestyles. That is both a hasty. I think it's a hasty generalization. You might call it a slippery slope. I think it's better as a hasty generalization, but I will accept slippery slope. Okay, it's not a straw man argument. Okay, so understand that more than one of these answers, in almost all of these cases, about 2 to 3 of them work. 2 to 3 of the answers work. That's fine. If you get one of those 3, and if I can see it working, I'm going to give it to you. Okay? So just go through it and do your best. And number 2, and I want to be clear about this language in here, I do say that, warning, many of these statements are common, racist, sexist, and homophobic, or just messed up. Okay? They are. And why I use them is because these are common types of statements you're going to run into just by breathing and being alive. They're stupid. Okay? So behind these kind of stupid arguments are logical fallacies. Okay? But the fallacy alone doesn't disprove it. Doesn't show it unreliable. But understand, this is how bigotry and homophobia and all these things work, is relying heavily on the fallacies. Okay, so go through it and do the best you can with it and send it back in. But please understand, I'm pointing these out as forms of stupidity. Okay, and send it back in when you're done. Anytime, send it back in by the end of the semester, and that's good. And I will go through this. It isn't going to be tough. It's going to help your grade. I think all of you are doing wonderfully. Okay, take care.